Her sister took her face, not with a blade, not with her hands, with a choice, a single selfish choice that cost Rosalind Thorne the face she was born with and the life that went with it. I will tell you how, but first I need to tell you about the man who remembered it. He remembered her face, not the scars, the face before them. That is where this story starts, with a man sitting at a desk in a cold house, holding a miniature portrait no larger than his palm, looking at a woman who no longer existed. The portrait had been painted 4 years ago, a commission from her father, one of those small oval miniatures that families exchanged during the season, a visual advertisement for a daughter on the market. The Reverend had sent copies to 3 families in the county, as was customary. Edmund's copy arrived with the quarterly parish correspondence, tucked between the tithe summary and a note about the church roof fund. The Reverend had included it without particular intention. Edmund had kept it with very particular intention. The painter was competent, not brilliant, and had captured what was there without embellishment. A woman of 23 with a round, warm face, high color in her cheeks, honey-colored hair that curled without effort, and amber eyes. Unusual, almost golden in certain light, the kind of eyes that made people look twice because the color was unexpected and because the expression behind it was not what the prettiness had prepared them for. The expression was intelligence, watchful, wry, faintly amused by the absurdity of sitting still while a stranger painted her. The mouth curved at one corner, not quite a smile, not quite a dare. Edmund Ashworth, Duke of Calder, set the portrait on the desk and covered it with a letter he had no intention of answering. He did this every morning, took it out, looked at it, put it away. A ritual with no purpose except punishment. He was 39, tall enough, just under 6 feet, but built narrow, as though his body had been designed for a corridor rather than a ballroom. Long arms, long hands, a face that was all angles and hollows, the kind of face that looked gaunt in candlelight and severe in daylight and merely tired the rest of the time. His hair had gone gray at the temples at 30 and was now more silver than dark, which wasn't distinguished so much as premature, making him look like a man of 50 who had the energy of a man of 39 and the social skills of neither. His eyes were dark brown, not the warm brown of earth or wood, but the flat, unreadable brown of deep water. The color people avoided because it gave nothing back. He had a way of sitting perfectly still that some people read as composure and most people read as something they wanted to leave the room to escape. He did not speak easily, not a stammer, nothing that neat. He was a man for whom words cost effort. Each sentence was weighed, edited, revised before it left his mouth, and the result was a cadence that sounded deliberate to the charitable and cold to everyone else. At London gatherings, hostesses seated him beside the most talkative women they could find. The talkative women talked. Edmund listened. The silence between them widened until the women gave up and the hostesses revised their charts. The one exception was the stables. Edmund walked the estate before dawn every morning and ended at the stable yard, where he kept 4 horses, a bay mare named Josephine, a grey gelding named Parliament, an ancient chestnut called the Professor, who had been retired for 6 years and refused to acknowledge it, and a black colt named after nothing because Edmund hadn't decided yet and the colt didn't seem to mind. He talked to them, not the clipped commands of a horseman giving instructions. Talked, long, unedited, unweighed monologues about estate business, about the drainage in the South Meadow, about a letter from his solicitor that he couldn't decide how to answer. He stood in the stable yard at 5 in the morning and spoke to 4 horses with the fluency and ease of a man addressing his closest friends, because they were his closest friends, and the horses did not require him to edit or weigh or revise. They required hay, the hay he could provide. The conversation was free. His groom, Tavish, had heard every word of these monologues for 19 years. Tavish told no one. This was the foundation of their professional relationship and, as far as Edmund was concerned, the basis of a genuine friendship, although he had never said so, because saying so would have required speaking to Tavish with the same ease he spoke to Josephine, and Tavish was not a horse. He had been in love once, with the woman in the portrait, and he had done nothing about it, because doing required speaking, and speaking required certainty, and Edmund Ashworth was not a man who arrived at certainty on anyone's schedule but his own. By the time he found the words, her face was gone. Her name was Rosalind Thorne, called Rose by her father, Roz by her sister, and nothing at all by the village any more, because the village had stopped using her name and started using the description. The Thorne girl, the scarred one. She was 27 now, 4 years since the illness. She lived in the same house she'd always lived in. Briar Cottage, southern edge of the village, the kind of house visitors called charming, and residents called drafty. Her father, Reverend James Thorne, had held the parish living for 30 years, which meant a comfortable house, a modest income, a good library, and 2 daughters he loved, in the slightly baffled way of scholarly men who understand Greek conjugation better than they understand the women eating breakfast across from them. Rosalind had been the pretty one. This matters, not because beauty is the point, but because it was the weapon used against her. She had been pretty the way a summer garden is pretty, easily, naturally, without effort. Honey-colored hair that curled on its own, a round, warm face with high color. Those eyes. She was not tall, 5'4", and she was built solid, with broad hips and strong arms, the body of a woman who carried wood and kneaded bread, and walked 3 miles to market and back without thinking about it. She had the kind of face people trusted, open, readable, warm. The face of a woman who would hold your baby while you fixed your hem and hand it back, smiling. Her sister Philippa was beautiful. The distinction matters. Pretty is approachable. Beautiful is aspirational. Philippa was 2 years younger, 3 inches taller, and built along entirely different lines. Narrow-waisted, long-necked, with their mother's dark hair and a face that was all geometry, sharp cheekbones above a pointed chin, eyebrows that arched naturally, in a way other women spent 20 minutes achieving with tweezers. She had a small mole above her left lip that she hated and that 3 suitors had called enchanting. Philippa was the one the village watched. She received 3 offers of marriage before she was 20. The sisters were not enemies. It would be simpler if they were, if the cruelty was born from malice, if the villain was a villain from the start. Philippa loved Rosalind. She braided her sister's hair on Sunday mornings. She saved her the larger portion of pudding. She cried harder than anyone when their mother died. But Philippa was jealous, not of Rosalind's face. Philippa's was better, and she knew it, jealous of the ease, the way Rosalind moved through rooms without friction, the way people warmed to her while they merely admired Philippa. The way their father, when he was tired or sick, called for Rose, not because he loved one more, but because Rosalind was warm and Philippa was not, and warmth is what the sick reach for. Edmund had noticed Rosalind at a harvest supper, 3 years before the illness. He was newly inherited. The title came from a cousin he barely knew, along with Calder Hall, 6,000 acres, and a house that hadn't been maintained in a decade. He attended the harvest supper because the tenants expected it. He sat at the long table in the tithe barn and ate roast mutton and drank cider and said approximately 11 words in 3 hours. Rosalind was seated 4 places away. She was 20. young, animated, arguing cheerfully with the tenant farmer beside her about whether this year's apple yield would beat the record. She had the numbers. The farmer did not. She won, and he bought her another cup of cider, and she drank it, and the amber of the cider matched the amber of her eyes, and Edmund noticed this and said nothing. He noticed her at church the following Sunday. She sang off-key, badly, confidently, with the joyful incompetence of a woman who loves music and has no ability for it. Philippa beside her sang beautifully and quietly. Edmund, in the Calder pew, listened to the wrong notes and felt something move in a part of his chest he had bricked up so thoroughly that the movement felt less like emotion and more like structural damage. He noticed her at the village shop, at the market, at the midsummer fair, where she beat 3 men at the coconut shy and laughed about it for the rest of the evening. He noticed her carrying firewood for old Mrs. Pratchett, whose bad hip kept her housebound in winter. He noticed her at the lending library, where she borrowed novels and agricultural journals in equal measure and returned them on time. 3 years. He composed sentences, dozens of them, maybe more, he lost count, that he intended to say to her. He delivered none. The words lived in his chest like letters in a drawer, written, sealed, unposted. He attended events where she would be. He positioned himself within speaking distance. He opened his mouth. Nothing came, or it came wrong, or it came after she'd already turned to someone else, someone who could produce a sentence without treating it like surgery. 3 years of silence. And then the illness came, and the face he had been trying to speak to was gone. The smallpox arrived in the village in September of 1839. For women, the disease was a particular cruelty. Those who survived were left with scars, pockmarks, deep and permanent, clustered on the face. In a world that measured women by their appearance, a scarred face was a social death sentence. The woman survived. Her prospects did not. Reverend Thorne had vaccinated both daughters as children, the cowpox method, available since Jenner's work in 1798. Both received the inoculation. Both developed the expected mild reaction. Both were, as far as anyone knew, protected. Philippa knew the risk was low, but she was 21 and beautiful, and the smallpox was in the village, and the distance between low risk and no risk was wide enough to hold every nightmare she'd ever had about her face. What Philippa did was not a single act. It was a series of small ones, each selfish, each deniable, each reasonable from the right angle, and the accumulated weight crushed her sister. Philippa left. Through a school friend, she arranged to stay with the Harding family in Bath until the outbreak passed. She told her father it was a social visit. She did not tell Rosalind that the Hardings had offered to take both sisters and that Philippa had given only one name, saying Rosalind would prefer to stay because the Reverend needed looking after. She took the safe berth and left Rosalind with the disease. She did not intend for Rosalind to get sick. She would say this later, and she would be telling the truth. She didn't plan it. She didn't calculate it. She simply protected herself and didn't extend the protection. The sin was omission, not commission. The difference, to the woman who lost her face, was academic. Rosalind caught smallpox in the 3rd week of October. She'd been nursing Mrs. Pratchett, whose grandson brought the disease home from the mill town. Rosalind went because nobody else would. The village was terrified. The other women stayed home, protecting their families, protecting their faces. Rosalind believed she was safe. She walked into Mrs. Pratchett's cottage with a basket of broth and clean linen, and she nursed the old woman for 4 days, and on the 5th day the fever hit. The Reverend sent for Dr. Howell. The doctor examined her and delivered the news. The vaccination had failed. It happened. Not often, but not never. In roughly one case in 20, the cowpox procedure didn't take. The immunity never developed. The body appeared protected, but wasn't. Vaccination in the 1840s was not yet mandatory, not yet perfected, and not yet fully understood. Rosalind had walked into Mrs. Pratchett's cottage believing she was safe, and the science of the decade had not been precise enough to tell her otherwise. The disease would run its course. There was nothing to do but wait. 11 days. Rosalind was delirious for most of them. The rash appeared on the 3rd day, face first, then arms, then torso. The pustules swelled, merged, wept. The Reverend sat beside her bed, reading aloud from her novels, because he didn't know what else to do, and once, at 3 in the morning on the worst night, he put down the book and just held her hand and said, "I'm here, Rose," over and over, which was not medicine, but was the thing he had. On the 7th day, Martha Dunn arrived. Martha was 34, unmarried, the daughter of a farrier who died when she was 12. She'd raised herself on stubbornness, odd jobs, and an encyclopedic knowledge of plants, acquired by reading every herbal in the lending library and verifying the contents in every hedgerow within 10 miles. She was built like her father's anvil, short, square, with shoulders broader than most women's and hands that looked like they could shoe a horse, which they could, because she'd learned before he died and the skill had not left her body. Her face was plain and freckled, her hair was mouse-brown and cut short because long hair caught fire in the forge, and she had a gap between her front teeth that showed when she smiled, which was less often than she laughed and more often than she cried. The village called her the hedge witch. They meant it unkindly. Martha didn't care. She grew herbs behind the farrier's forge, which she still lived in because nobody else wanted it and because the forge had the best ventilation in the village. Important when you're drying chamomile in the rafters. She kept a cat there, too, a gray tabby named Ptolemy, who caught mice and ignored everything else, including Martha's opinions about his diet. Martha was not a doctor. She said this clearly, repeatedly. She could not cure smallpox. What she could do was reduce the scarring. Her mother's herbal contained a poultice recipe, comfrey, chamomile, honey, that softened healing scabs and reduced the depth of pockmarks. It didn't eliminate them. Nothing eliminated them. But the difference between a treated face and an untreated one was the difference between scars you could see across a room and scars you had to look for. She came to the cottage uninvited, carrying a basket of herbs and the expression of a woman who has decided to help and will not be discussing alternatives. "I'm not a doctor," she told the Reverend, "but the doctor has done everything the doctor can do, which is nothing. And I have a poultice that will help with the scarring, and I'm going to apply it whether you approve or not, because your daughter nursed Mrs. Pratchett when nobody else would, and the least this village owes her is someone willing to sit beside her bed with comfrey and a clean cloth." The Reverend, who had been reading novels to an unconscious woman for a week, said, "Thank you." Martha stayed. 4 days. Poultice every 3 hours, face, neck, arms, clean linens, willow bark tea for the fever. She slept in the chair beside the bed, and she woke at intervals, and she applied the comfrey with hands that did not shake, though later, much later, months later, alone in the forge with Ptolemy on her lap, her hands shook. But not then, not when it mattered. Rosalind woke on the 9th day. The first thing she did was touch her own face. Her fingers found the swelling, the crusted pustules, the landscape of damage her hands could read before her eyes could see. "Don't touch," Martha said. "My face is still your face. It'll look different. I won't lie about that. But the poultice is working, and you're alive, and Mrs. Pratchett is alive because of you. And I need you to lie still and let the comfrey do what it does." The scars settled over the following weeks. Martha's treatment had worked, not perfectly, but measurably. The left side bore the worst. Deep pockmarks, from temple to jaw, scattered marks across the nose and left cheek. The right side was lighter, shallow marks, visible but not defining. The neck and arms scarred too, but clothing covered those. The face could not be covered. The first time Rosalind left the cottage was a Tuesday in November, 3 weeks after the fever broke. She needed thread from the village shop, a mundane errand, the kind of thing she'd done 1,000 times, the kind of thing that should not require courage. She walked the half-mile to the shop with her shawl pulled forward and her chin down, which did not conceal the scars, but gave her hands something to hold. The bell rang when she opened the door. Mrs. Cartwright, who had run the shop for 20 years and who had always greeted Rosalind with the easy warmth of a woman who liked her, looked up from the counter. Mrs. Cartwright's face did 4 things in the space of 1 second. Rosalind counted them, because counting was what she did when the world delivered information too fast for feeling. First, recognition. Second, shock, the involuntary widening of the eyes, the parting of the lips. Third, the recovery, the assembling of the face into something acceptable. Fourth, the smile, the wrong smile. The smile that was 2 degrees warmer than the old smile, warmer with pity rather than warmth, and Rosalind could feel the difference the way you feel the difference between sun and a lamp. Both give light, one is real. "Rosalind, dear, how lovely to see you up and about." Behind Mrs. Cartwright, a child, the farrier's granddaughter, 7 or 8, stared openly at the scars with the unedited fascination of a person too young to have learned the social mechanics of not looking. The child's mother pulled her away by the arm and whispered something. The child kept staring over her shoulder as she was dragged to the back of the shop. "Just thread," Rosalind said. "White, 2 spools." Mrs. Cartwright fetched the thread. She wrapped it. She handed it across the counter with both hands, the way you hand something to a person who is fragile, and Rosalind took it and paid and left and walked home and sat on the kitchen step and pressed her hands on her knees and understood that the village she had grown up in, the village she had nursed and gardened and served, was going to treat her from now on with the specific gentle cruelty of people who feel sorry for you and cannot hide it. She did not go back to the shop for 2 months. Martha bought her thread. Philippa came home from Bath in November. She walked through the door and saw her sister and stopped in the hallway with her traveling case in her hand. Her face, smooth, clear, untouched, protected by distance, froze. "Ros," she said. Rosalind looked at her sister. She took in Philippa's face, the face the disease hadn't reached because Philippa had made sure it couldn't. "You left," Rosalind said. "I was invited." "You left. The Hardings offered both of us." "You gave them one name." Mrs. Harding had written to the Reverend during the illness, a kind letter, expressing sympathy, hoping both daughters were well. She had mentioned in the postscript how glad she was that at least Philippa had been safely with them, and how sorry she was that Rosalind had declined the invitation to join her sister. Rosalind had not declined. Rosalind had not been asked. The Reverend had shown her the letter without understanding what it revealed. Rosalind had understood immediately. Philippa's case slipped in her hand. She caught it. Father needed both of us or neither. You chose yourself." The silence that followed rearranged the family. The Reverend stood in the study doorway, spectacles in hand, hearing his daughters speak in a register they had never used. The hallway clock ticked. A log shifted in the grate. Outside, a starling sat on the window-sill, eating something it had found in the gutter. A crust, possibly, or a dead beetle, with the single-minded absorption of a creature unbothered by human sorrow. Philippa put down her case. She walked upstairs. She closed the door. At dinner she sat opposite Rosalind and ate, and did not look at the scarred half of her sister's face, and did not apologize. She never apologized. Not that day, not the next week, not in the 4 years since. The apology sat between them like furniture too large to move. Philippa married Edward Holt, a solicitor's clerk, the following year. She lived half a mile away. She visited Sundays. She brought cake and news and the careful cheerfulness of a woman performing sisterhood without inhabiting it. Rosalind ate the cake. She did not forgive, because forgiveness required the apology, and the apology never came. What she did instead was what people do when a wound is too large for the available medicine. She grew around it. The way a tree grows around a fence wire, enclosing it, incorporating it, into the trunk, never dissolving it. She stopped going to social events. She stopped attending the market. She walked to church Sundays and sat in the back pew and sang off-key, still badly, but quietly now, as though the volume had been turned down along with everything else. She kept the cottage, she kept the garden, she managed the parish accounts that the Reverend neglected because numbers bored him, and she arranged her body. In every interaction, the damaged side angled away. She sat on the right side of pews. She stood at angles in conversation. Her hand rested against her jaw when she was thinking, which was often, and the hand always landed on the left. Martha, who visited weekly with herbs and tea and an honesty that had no diplomatic setting, told Rosalind she was an idiot. "You're hiding from people who aren't worth hiding from." "I'm not hiding, I'm managing the angle." "You're angling yourself out of your own life. The scars aren't the problem, Roz. The turning is the problem. A woman who turns away teaches the world she believes she should." Rosalind heard this. She did not change her behavior because knowing a thing and acting on it are separated by a distance that logic can't cross. But she heard it. Edmund watched the illness take her from across the boundary of his own cowardice. He knew, from his steward, from the village, from the gossip that accelerates around disease, that the Thorne girl was sick, that the vaccination had failed, that Martha Dunn was treating her, that she survived. He sent a basket, fruit, wine, a note. "I hope for your swift recovery. Ashworth." 7 words. He'd written dozens of versions. The note was formal, distant, the kind a landlord sends a tenant's family, but it was 7 words more than he'd managed in person. Rosalind replied, "Thank you, Your Grace. The pears were excellent." 9 words. He kept the note in his desk beside the portrait. He did not visit. Not during the illness, not during the recovery, not during the 4 years that followed. He told himself it was propriety. A duke doesn't call on an unmarried woman without invitation. He told himself it was consideration. She was recovering. She didn't need a stranger in her parlor. He told himself many reasonable things, and all of them were true, and none of them were the reason. He was afraid, not of the scars, of himself, that he would stand in her parlor and look at her changed face, and the words would not come again, and his silence would be read as revulsion, and the damage would be worse than the disease. So he stayed at Calder Hall. He managed his acres. He read. He sat at his desk every morning and looked at a portrait and punished himself. Martha, who cleaned for the Calder estate twice a month because the money was steady and because the Duke's library was the best in the county and he let her borrow from it, told him he was a coward on a Tuesday in March, 4 years after the illness. She was dusting the study at the time. "You have a portrait of Rosalind Thorne in your desk. You've had it 4 years. You take it out every morning. I know this because the drawer has a thumb mark deeper than any other mark on any other drawer in this house. Miss Dunn, I'm not finished. She set down the duster. Rosalind is disappearing. She sits sideways in every room. She hasn't looked directly at another person's face in 2 years. And you, the one man who might change that, are sitting here looking at a painting of who she used to be instead of walking 2 miles and seeing who she is. The scars are on her face. The damage is in what she does with her body. These are different problems. The scars I can't fix. The body, someone needs to show her it doesn't need fixing, and that someone should probably be the man who spent 7 years noticing her from across rooms, and never once, in her hearing, was anything but silent. She picked up the duster and left. Edmund sat with his correspondence and the sensation of having been taken apart by a woman with a feather duster. He took the portrait out. He looked at it. The round face, the curls, the eyes, the almost smile. He put it back, closed the drawer, locked it. He would go to her, not to the portrait. To her. He went in 3 weeks. He lost his nerve twice, on the Wednesday and again on Monday. But the delay was also practical. He needed a reason. A duke calling on an unmarried woman without purpose starts gossip, and she'd had enough gossip. Martha, on her next cleaning day, provided one with aggressive efficiency. The parish accounts. Reverend Thorne is behind, as always. The quarter-day filing needs the landlord's signature on the tithe records. You're the landlord. The records are late. Go. You're managing me. Someone has to. You're terrible at it. She paused. And when you see her face, don't look away. Whatever you see, she'll be watching for it. The flinch, the glance to the easier side. Don't do it. Just look at her. He went on a Thursday in late March, 2 miles along the lane, through the village, past the church. Tithe records in a leather case, second-best coat. The best would suggest an occasion. His heart was running at roughly twice its resting rate, which he calculated because Edmund calculated everything, including the things that calculation could not help. The Reverend answered the door, thin, distracted, spectacles on his nose, book in hand. Your Grace, is everything? The tithe records? The tithe records, overdue. I'd like to review them with whoever manages the parish accounts. That would be Rose. She's in the kitchen. The hallway smelled of bread and dried lavender, books on every surface. A cat, orange, elderly, absolute indifference to titles, occupied the only clear chair. Edmund stepped over a pile of sermons. She was at the kitchen table. Back to the door, which was not accidental. She sat with her back to every door. The scarred side faced the wall. She was working on a ledger, columns of neat figures. Her hair was pinned up but curling at the nape. Gray wool dress, sleeves pushed up, forearms dusted with flour from bread she'd been making before she sat down with the numbers. Rose, the Duke, tithe records. She turned. The left side came first. Pockmarks, clustered from temple to jaw, deep in places, shallow in others. Uneven texture, ridged, the terrain of a disease that had occupied the territory and left its marks. Scattered pitting across the nose. The jawline on the left rough where it had been smooth, the right side lighter. Shallow marks, visible but not defining. The cheek mostly clear, the mouth unchanged, that same curve at the corner. And the eyes, the same, exactly the same as the harvest supper, the church, the coconut shy, warm and watchful and amused by something the rest of the face didn't quite explain. She looked at him. He looked at her. He did not look away. She was watching for it, the catalogue of reactions she'd been compiling for 4 years. The widened eyes, pity. The gaze sliding right, avoidance. The swallow, revulsion. She was reading him the way she read ledgers. Edmund looked at her whole face. Left, right, scars, flower, the pen in her hand. He looked, and nothing in him flinched, because the woman sitting at this table with parish accounts and bread flour was the same woman who had argued about apple yields 7 years ago, and the disease had not taken that. It had not taken any of the parts that mattered. He spoke. "Miss Thorne, the tithe records are late. I understand you manage them. I've brought the estate copies. Would you have time this afternoon?" His voice. She'd never heard it directed at her. She knew who he was, the quiet duke, the one who sat at the ends of tables and said nothing. She'd assumed his silence was coldness, that the dark eyes and silver hair and narrow face added up to a man who held himself apart because he thought he was above. His voice was not cold. It was careful, each word placed with effort, the way someone places stones across a stream, testing each one before trusting it with weight. "I have time now," Rosalind said. "Sit down, move the cat." The cat objected. Edmund set it on the window-sill, where it stared at him with the focused hostility of an animal whose afternoon had been ruined. He sat across from Rosalind and placed the tithe records between them. She turned to face the table. The marks were toward him now. She hadn't arranged herself. The table gave her no choice. For the first time, she was simply sitting. "These are a mess," she said. "My steward's work. Your steward needs replacing. The McGregor tithe uses the old rate, and the Bellamy parcel is listed at 40 acres. It was subdivided last year. Should be 2 entries, 22 and 18, different rates for arable and pasture." She said this in about 12 seconds. His steward had maintained these records for 3 years. "You see this immediately," he said. "I see numbers. Numbers don't angle away from you." The sentence escaped before she meant it to. He saw the flash of regret, the barely visible tightening at her mouth. Something honest had slipped through a door she'd left ajar. He let it sit. He didn't chase it. "May I come back Thursday? There are more records. They could be sent by messenger." "They could. But you'd rather bring them yourself." "I would." She looked at him, not at his title or his voice or his hair. She looked at the quality of his stillness, a man who sat across from her scarred face and had not rearranged himself once. "Thursday, bring the Bellamy records, both parcels, and tell your steward that if he gets the McGregor calculation wrong again, I'll write to him personally. The letter will contain diagrams." Edmund almost smiled. His mouth was not practiced at it. The muscles attempted the shape without fully committing. Rosalind saw the attempt. He walked home in the late afternoon. 2 miles, the tithe records in his case, the portrait in his locked drawer, the woman in the kitchen. 7 years of unspoken sentences, and the first real conversation had been about parish accounting, and it was the best conversation of his life. He came back every Thursday for 2 months. The tithe records took 1 visit. The estate accounts took 4. The tenant rolls, which Rosalind requested because she had questions about Calder grazing rights, took 2 more. By the 6th visit, the administrative excuse was exhausted. Both of them knew it. Neither mentioned it. He came back anyway. The Reverend noticed in the way scholarly men notice things, belatedly, with the vague sense that something was happening that his Greek couldn't translate. "The Duke keeps coming," he told Martha. "Thursdays?" "Yes." "The records are finished." "Yes." "Why does he—" "Reverend?" Martha set down the dusting cloth. "The man has visited your daughter every Thursday for 6 weeks. He brings records he doesn't need reviewed. He stays 3 hours. He has spoken more words in your kitchen than he has spoken in any room in this county in a decade. Why do you think?" The Reverend cleaned his spectacles. "Put them back on." "Oh, yes. Oh, should I do something?" "You should stay in your study and read your Greek and let it happen. The best thing you can contribute to this situation is your absence." He retreated. Martha dusted. Rosalind in the kitchen heard none of this. She'd found an error in the Calder dairy yields that suggested the estate was being overcharged for feed, and the error was more interesting to her than whatever was being muttered in the hall. On the fourth Thursday, Edmund brought the wrong records, the Bellamy grazing schedules instead of the dairy accounts. He realized the mistake when he opened the case, and his face did something Rosalind hadn't seen. It flushed. The tips of his ears went red. A man who controlled every word he spoke could not, apparently, control the blood supply to his ears. "These are the wrong documents," he said. "I can see that. I should go back and—" "You'll lose an hour on the road. Stay. We can work on the dairy figures from my copies. They're better than yours, anyway." He stayed. They worked on her copies. The cat climbed onto the table and sat on the Bellamy schedules as though claiming them for itself, and neither Edmund nor Rosalind moved it, because moving the cat would have required reaching across the table, and the table was small, and reaching would have meant proximity, and proximity was a territory they were not yet mapping. At 3 o'clock they stopped working, not because the work was done, but because Rosalind's father called from the study to ask if anyone wanted tea, and the question broke the concentration, and they sat for 20 minutes drinking tea and not working and not talking about records and not talking about anything much at all. Edmund mentioned that the south meadow had flooded. Rosalind said the cottage gutters needed clearing. The cat washed itself on the Bellamy documents. The Reverend brought biscuits, and then forgot he'd brought them, and brought a second plate, and they had 2 plates of biscuits, and nobody mentioned it. It was the most ordinary afternoon of Rosalind's year. Nothing advanced, nothing changed, nobody confessed anything or corrected anything or grew. They just sat in a kitchen with tea and too many biscuits and a cat on the paperwork. And when Edmund left, walking the 2 miles home in the rain because he had not brought an umbrella, because a man who planned every sentence he spoke could not, apparently, plan for weather, Rosalind cleared the table and washed the cups and found herself humming, off-key. The first time she'd hummed since the illness. She stopped herself. Then she started again. The humming wasn't good. It had never been good. But it was there, and it was hers, and it was back. Martha, on her next visit, noticed, "You sat facing him for an hour last Thursday. Whole face, no hand on the jaw. We were reviewing dairy accounts. You were reviewing each other. The accounts were a fig leaf. Martha, I'm just saying the same thing I said last week, and the week before." She paused. "I'm starting to repeat myself, which means either I'm getting old or you're not listening." "I'm listening." "Then listen to this." Martha's face shifted. The bluntness softened into something she rarely showed. "Roz, I sat beside your bed for 4 days. I put comfrey on your face while you were too sick to know, and afterward, in the forge, alone, with Ptolemy, my hands shook for a week. I couldn't hold a teacup. I never told you that. I don't tell people things like that, but I sat with you through the worst of it, and I am asking you, not telling you, asking, to let this man sit with you through the rest of it." Rosalind looked at Martha. In 7 years of friendship she had never seen Martha's voice catch. The bluntness was armor. Beneath it was a woman who had kept her hands steady by force of will and then gone home and fallen apart where nobody could see. "I didn't know your hands shook," Rosalind said. "Nobody knows. I'm telling you because the people who help are not unaffected by what it costs. And the man in your kitchen is not unaffected either. He is simply very good at stillness. The thing that changed was a Thursday in May. Rosalind was in the garden. The Reverend, who had finally understood what was happening and had made one useful decision, sent Edmund through the house to the back door. He came through and saw her kneeling in the soil, her hair escaping its pins, curling at her neck. Gray dress, sleeves up, soil on her, hands, her knees, her forearms, an iris rhizome in one hand, trowel in the other. She looked up, the whole face, unguarded, unposed, caught in the middle of something she loved. The scars in full May light, pockmarks catching the sun, ridges and hollows visible without softening shadow, the right side clearer, warmer, her eyes squinting against the brightness. She looked like a woman who grew things. She looked like herself. "You're early," she said. "The walk was faster than I expected." "You walked faster because you wanted to be here." "Yes." One syllable. Unqualified. The most honest thing he'd said to her. She looked at him, tall, narrow, silver-haired, holding his leather case in her garden with his measured voice and his brown eyes that had never once slid away from the damaged half of her face. "Sit on the bench. I need to finish these irises. Then we can pretend to look at records we both know we finished reviewing 3 weeks ago." He sat. He watched her work. The hands, the precise cuts, the way she handled the rhizomes with the same care she handled numbers. The garden was beautiful and messy and productive, the kind of garden that happens when someone stops performing tidiness and starts performing abundance. A robin was investigating a freshly turned patch of earth beside the path, pulling at a worm with the grim determination of a bird that has committed to a task and will see it through regardless of the worm's opinions. "I should tell you something," he said. She set down the trowel. "I had a portrait of you, a miniature, painted before the illness. I kept it in my desk, looked at it every morning. Had. I locked it in the drawer 3 weeks ago when I started coming here." "Why?" "Because I was visiting the portrait instead of visiting you, and the portrait is not you. It's a painting of a woman who no longer exists, and I was using it as a substitute for the woman who does, and the woman who does is—" He stopped. The sentence had gotten away from him. The deliberate construction collapsed halfway through, the architecture failing, his weight on a word that couldn't hold it. "Better," he said. "The woman who does is better than the painting, and I was hiding behind it, the way I hide behind silence." The words were not elegant. They were not measured or placed or edited. They came out rough, unfinished, and Edmund heard them and was horrified by the lack of craft and relieved by the honesty. Rosalind looked at him for a long time. The robin gave up on the worm and flew to the fence, offended. "You kept a portrait of my old face," she said. "Yes." "And locked it away." "Yes." "Because you decided to look at my actual face." "Yes." "Edmund." First time. "Not your Grace." "Edmund." The sound of his name in her voice did something to his interior architecture that could not be undone. "Don't lock it away," she said. "That was me. This is also me. They're both my face. Don't. Choose between them. Hold both." "I can hold both." "Good. Now sit down properly. I need help with the irises. Hold this rhizome and don't let the cat near it. He eats them, and he's sick on the sermon notes, and Father blames me." Edmund held the rhizome. The orange cat, who had followed them into the garden with the unerring instinct of an animal drawn to anything it shouldn't eat, advanced. He defended the iris. Rosalind divided and planted, and her hands were in the soil, and her face was in the light, and the afternoon became evening. Edmund's mistake was not a single act. It was an instinct. The instinct of a man who has been silent for 7 years and finally has something he wants to protect. In June, Rosalind mentioned she'd stopped attending the Midsummer Fair. 4 years ago, the crowds, the staring, the whispers, the practiced warm sympathy that was worse than cruelty because you couldn't argue with it. Edmund said nothing. He went home, and he did the thing. He went to the village. He visited the baker, the publican, the vicar's wife, the fair committee. For Edmund, speaking to this many people in a single day was an act of extraordinary effort, the verbal equivalent of a forced march. He told them, in his deliberate, stone-by-stone way, that Miss Thorne should be welcomed, that her scars were not grounds for whispers, that anyone who treated her with less than respect would answer to him. He didn't threaten. He simply made it clear, with the quiet authority of a man who owned their land, that the village's treatment of Rosalind Thorne was going to change. The invitation arrived at Briar Cottage on a Tuesday. Rosalind read it at the kitchen table, wearing her father's spectacles. She needed them for small print and would not admit it. "Did you know about this?" she asked the Reverend. "About what?" "The fair. I haven't been invited in 4 years. This one was hand-delivered. Mrs. Paxton brought it. Mrs. Paxton hasn't spoken to me since the illness." Mrs. Paxton smiled at me with the brightness of a woman who has been instructed to smile. She walked 2 miles to Calder Hall. She stood in his doorway, both sides of her face in the afternoon light. Not the held, steady control he'd come to know. Anger. Real anger. "You went to the village?" "Yes." "You told them to be kind to me." "I asked them." "You asked them the way a duke asks, which is not asking, it is instructing." You wanted the village to welcome me, and they will. They'll smile and invite me, and none of it will be real. Every smile will be your instruction. You haven't changed how they see me. You've changed how they perform." She was shaking, not with weakness, with the effort of holding something enormous in a sentence-sized container. "Every person who has entered my life since the illness has tried to fix it. My father reads me novels. Philippa brings cake. The vicar prays for my complexion. Martha tells me I'm an idiot. And now you, the one person who just looked at me, you've gone behind my back and arranged the audience. I didn't tell them what to feel. You told them what to show. And for a woman who has spent 4 years reading faces for honesty, that is the same thing. I will never know now whether Mrs. Paxton smiles because she wants to or because her landlord told her to. You've taken the one thing I needed, the ability to trust what I see, and contaminated it." She left. She walked home. She did not come Thursday, or the Thursday after, or the next. Edmund sat in his study. 6 weeks. He did not take the portrait out. He did not open his correspondence. He barely ate, though he told Martha he was eating, and Martha counted the untouched plates and did not believe him. And there was a Thursday, the 3rd Thursday of the silence, when Mrs. Hargreaves, the vicar's wife, came to the cottage to return a borrowed book. Rosalind answered the door, angled, scars, turned from the doorway. Mrs. Hargreaves looked at her, and her face did something Rosalind had not expected. It crumpled, not with pity, with genuine, unperformed distress. "I'm sorry, Miss Thorne. I should have come sooner, after the illness. I should have come, and I didn't, and I'm ashamed of that, and I've been ashamed of it for 4 years, and the Duke didn't tell me to say this. He told me to be welcoming. I'm not being welcoming. I'm being honest. I was a coward. You nursed Mrs. Pratchett, and I stayed home because I was afraid. I should have helped. I'm sorry." She thrust the book forward. Her hands were shaking. She turned and walked away before Rosalind could respond. Rosalind stood in the doorway holding a borrowed copy of Sense and Sensibility and a genuine apology she had not expected and had not prepared a response for. She had assumed Mrs. Hargreaves was performing. She had been wrong. The woman was not performing. She was 4 years late, and she was honest. Rosalind closed the door and sat down and pressed her hands on her knees and thought about the fact that she had spent 4 years reading faces and she had read this one wrong. Martha, on her next cleaning day at Calder Hall, found Edmund with 6 weeks of unopened post and hollow eyes. "She's not coming back," he said. "She's not coming back on your schedule. She'll come back on hers. I've damaged the trust. Yes. You built something out of Thursday visits and steady eyes, and you burned it by going to the village. She's right about everything. What do I do? Nothing, which is the thing you're worst at and the thing she needs most. Don't visit, don't write, don't arrange. Sit in your silence and let her decide whether the weeks of honest looking are worth more than the one act of dishonest arranging. And if she decides they're not?" Martha picked up the untouched breakfast. "Then you'll know. Knowing is better than arranging. That's the lesson." 6 weeks. He walked his estate. He read. He did nothing. The nothing cost him more than the 7 years of silence had. On the 42nd day, Rosalind appeared at the Calder Hall kitchen door. Not the front, the kitchen. Martha opened it. "Is he in?" "Study, hasn't eaten. 6 weeks. Send him to the garden." He came through the kitchen looking like a man who'd been doing nothing for 6 weeks and had forgotten how to do something. Rosalind was planting irises along the south-facing wall. "I brought these from the cottage," she said, not looking up. "Your south wall gets the same light. They'll do well here." Edmund stood at the garden's edge. "I went to the fair," she said. "You?" "Last week. Alone. I walked in and stood in the crowd and bought a cider and watched the coconut shy, and Mrs. Paxton smiled at me, and I couldn't tell if the smile was real or instructed, and it didn't matter." She pressed another iris into the soil. "It didn't matter because I was there. Whole face, in the daylight. The cider was good, and the coconut shy was rigged, as always, and I was there, and the person who made me believe I could be. It wasn't Mrs. Paxton. It was a man who sat in my kitchen for 2 months and looked at my face without flinching." She paused. "The village thing was wrong. The looking was right." She looked up. Both sides. Soil on her hands. "Don't do it again." "I won't. And don't stop coming Thursdays." "I won't. There's a fork in the shed. This soil is compacted." He fetched the fork. He turned the soil. She planted. They worked in silence, his kind of silence, the comfortable kind, the silence of 2 people choosing to repair something with work instead of words. The fair changed Philippa's story, too. Rosalind had gone alone. She'd stood in the crowd with cider and her full face in the daylight. She was walking home when Philippa intercepted her on the lane. Philippa looked. She always looked. Beautiful. Dark hair pinned perfectly. Clear skin. The face the disease hadn't touched. "You went," Philippa said. "I went. After everything you did?" The words fell like stones into a well. 4 years of weight behind them. "I'm going to say this once," Rosalind said. "Then I'm walking home to make dinner." "Are you listening?" "Yes." "You left. You took the safe berth. You protected your face and left mine to the disease. I know you didn't plan it. I know the vaccination was supposed to work. I know the damage was bigger than anything you intended. But you left, and you never said sorry. And the gap where that apology should be has been sitting in our family for 4 years, like a room we walk around but never go in." Philippa's eyes were wet. Her perfect face was coming apart. not from disease, but from the slower erosion of guilt you refuse to name. "I was afraid," Philippa said. "I was 21, and I was afraid, and I chose myself, and every day since, every day, Roz. I've looked at your face and seen what my fear cost you, and I don't." She stopped. The words ran out the way words run out when the feeling behind them is too large for the container. She stood in the lane and cried, not beautifully, with the ugly, graceless weeping of someone who has held something for 4 years and finally dropped it. I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry I didn't take you with me. I'm sorry I never said it. I've wanted to say it every Sunday when I bring the cake and every time I see the scars, and every morning when I look in my mirror and see the face I saved instead of yours." Rosalind stood and listened. "I don't forgive you," she said. "Not yet. Forgiveness is a garden. You don't plant it and harvest it the same day, but you've finally said the words, and that matters." Philippa wiped her face with her hand. Graceless, human, nothing like the composed woman the village admired. "Can I walk you home?" "Yes, you're carrying the cider. Cup." "I've been holding it for a mile." They walked home, not arm in arm, not heeled, but together on the same road, in the same direction. The summer and autumn passed. Edmund came Thursdays. Rosalind planted irises at Calder Hall. The garden on the south wall grew, irises, lavender, rosemary, sage. She was building something on his land, and neither of them named it. Martha named it because Martha always named the things other people avoided. "You're making a home in his garden." "I'm planting herbs." "You're planting yourself. Every rhizome is a root. Every root is a claim." "Martha." "Plant faster. He's not getting younger." She paused. The bluntness shifted into something more careful. Martha choosing her words, which was unusual enough that Rosalind noticed. "Roz, you understand what you're building toward. A duke, a reverend's daughter with no dowry, no connections, and a scarred face. The county will have opinions. His solicitor will have objections. Every hostess between here and London will have something to say about it, and none of what they say will be kind." "I know. Do you? Because the village gossip about your face will be nothing compared to the county gossip about your station. They'll say he married beneath him. They'll say he chose you because no woman of rank would have him. The silent duke, the awkward one, the one who talks to horses. They'll say the match makes sense because you're both damaged goods." "That's a vile thing to say." "It's a vile thing people will say. I'm telling you now, so you hear it from me before you hear it from them." Rosalind pulled a weed from the iris bed, then another. The weeding was not urgent. Her hands needed something to do. "Edmund knows this," she said. "He's lived in their estimation for 19 years. The short duke, the cold duke, the one who can't hold a conversation at dinner. He's been the subject of county gossip since he inherited. I don't think he's afraid of more. And you? I've been the scarred one for 4 years. Before that, I was the pretty Thorne girl, which was its own kind of reduction. The county can call me whatever it likes. I've survived worse names than beneath him." Martha looked at her. Then she nodded. A short, sharp nod, the kind she gave when a plant was growing the way she'd wanted. "Good. Plant faster." Edmund's steward, a careful man named Briggs, who had managed Calder's business affairs for 12 years, raised the same concern in the study one evening over estate correspondence. "Your Grace, the visits to the rectory. The village is beginning to— that is, people are drawing conclusions." "Let them draw." "A reverend's daughter, Your Grace, without dowry, without family, and with, forgive me, with the disfigurement. The county will—" The county has spent 19 years deciding what I am based on my height and my hair, and the fact that I don't perform well at dinner. Their conclusions have been wrong about me for 2 decades. They will be wrong about this, too." He set down his pen. "Briggs, I have been the gossip of this county since I inherited. The silent duke, the one who can't find a wife, the one who talks to his horses. I have nothing left to protect from gossip, and the woman I intend to marry has survived gossip that would have destroyed anyone the county considers my equal. She is not beneath me. She is the only person I have ever met who is precisely at my level. File the correspondence. That will be all." Briggs filed the correspondence. He did not raise the subject again. The irises bloomed in April. Purple, yellow, white, a cascade along the south wall, visible from the lane. The scarred woman's garden growing on the Duke's land. Edmund came early on a Thursday morning, walking faster. He admitted this now. The irises caught the April light, and the wall that had been bare was alive with color Rosalind had put there. She was in the garden, kneeling, as always. Gray dress, soil on the knees, hair half collapsed, the scars toward him. Morning light showing every mark. She was not arranged. She was not performing. She was Rosalind in the garden, growing things. "The irises are blooming," he said. "I can see that. I planted them. They're visible from the lane." That was the point. A garden that hides is not a garden. It's a secret. I'm done with secrets. She stood. She turned to face him. Morning light, direct and clear, both sides, pockmarks and clear skin, and her eyes and the mouth that still tilted at one corner. "Edmund." "Yes?" "I'd like you to look at me." "I am looking at you. Not the way you look at ledgers, the way you've wanted to look at me since the harvest supper 7 years ago when I argued about apples and you sat 4 places away and said nothing." Edmund looked at her. He let the measured, rationed interior of himself open. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the way a door opens, when the hinges have been closed so long they resist. He looked at her face. Left side with the scars, right side clearer. Her eyes, the almost smile she'd been wearing since the portrait, flower on her forearm, soil on her knees, iris pollen on her fingertips. I have. There is something I've been—" He stopped, started over. The sentences he had composed, all of them, the dozens he'd carried for years, were gone. The rehearsed phrases, the edited words, the speeches practiced in empty rooms, gone. His mouth was open, and the prepared version had vanished, and what was left was a man standing in a garden with nothing between him and the truth except the air. "I love you," he said. "I have. Since the harvest, since the apples. And I should have said it then, and I should have said it at church and at the market and at the fair, and I didn't because I couldn't. The words, I am not—" He stopped again. His hands were at his sides, opening and closing. He was the most articulate man in the county when writing a letter, and the least articulate man in England when standing in front of the woman he loved trying to say so. "I'm doing this badly," he said. "Yes, you are. I love you, before the illness, now. The scars are. They are part of you, and I don't love you despite them. I just love you, and I've composed. I don't know how many sentences to tell you this, and none of them are coming out right. And I'm standing in your father's garden making a fool of—" "Edmund." "Yes? Stop talking." He stopped. Rosalind stepped forward. She was shorter, 5'4" to his nearly 6 feet. She was covered in soil. Her hair was half down, the left side of her face in full April sunlight. She reached up and put her hand on his face. Her left hand, soil, iris pollen, trowel calluses, on his jaw. "You are the most inconvenient man I have ever known," she said. "You're slow, you're silent. You took 7 years to say what a normal person would have managed in 7 minutes. You went to the village without asking me. You kept a portrait of a woman who doesn't exist. And you have spent every Thursday for 4 months sitting in my kitchen looking at my face as though it were the most interesting thing you've ever seen. It is. I know. That's the inconvenient part." She kept her hand on his jaw. "I love you too. It terrifies me, because the last time I trusted the world with something precious, the world took my face. And I'm standing here anyway, with iris pollen on your cheek, because Martha told me to plant faster, and she's right." He put his hand over hers, his long fingers over her soil-marked, calloused ones. They stood in the garden with the irises blooming, and the April light on both their faces, his angular and gray, hers scarred and warm. They didn't kiss. The moment was too new for that. What they did was stand together and hold each other's face and look, really look, with nothing between them, and the looking was enough. Epilogue. They married in September, the same month as the illness. Rosalind chose the date. "I'm taking September back. It doesn't belong to the disease." The village church, small. The Reverend performed the ceremony himself, which was irregular, but which the bishop allowed because the bishop had heard the story and was, beneath the vestments, a romantic. Rosalind wore amber. Not white, not cream. Amber, the color of her eyes and cider, an autumn light. Martha made the dress. It was not elegant. Martha said well-constructed was better than elegant, and Rosalind said she was right, and the dress had pockets, which Martha considered essential and fashion considered irrelevant. She carried irises instead of a bouquet. Purple from the south wall at Calder Hall. She walked down the aisle with her face uncovered, unturned, unangled. Both sides in the candlelight. Every person in the church could see her. She did not hide from any of them. The Reverend cried during his own ceremony, not the composed clerical weeping of a man performing emotion, the real kind, the kind that makes your spectacles fog and your voice crack on dearly beloved. He got through the vows by reading them, because his Greek was better than his composure. Martha said it was unprofessional. Rosalind said it was the most honest sermon he'd ever given. Philippa sat in the second pew. She did not cry. She sat with her hands folded and her beautiful face still, and watched her sister walk toward a man who had looked at her, all of her, every mark, and had not turned away. After the ceremony in the churchyard, "You look—" Philippa started. "Don't say beautiful. I was going to say like you." Rosalind looked at her sister, the sister who left, the sister who took the safe berth, the sister who cried on a lane and said the words 4 years too late. The garden of forgiveness was not harvested, but it was growing. Rosalind could see the first green shoots. "Thank you," she said. "That's better than beautiful." Martha attended in her best dress, which was not very good, and a hat she had apparently constructed from ambition and a complete disregard for millinery convention. She sat in the front pew because nobody dared suggest otherwise. Ptolemy, the forge cat, had attempted to follow her to church and been intercepted at the lich gate by the verger, who lost the argument and allowed the cat in, where it sat beneath the pew and washed itself throughout the vows. Martha's wedding gift was a basket of herbs, rosemary for remembrance, sage for wisdom, lavender for calm, comfrey for healing. "Though you seem to have managed the healing without me," she said. "I have never managed anything without you." "True, but it's nice to hear." Edmund's vows were not long. For a man who rationed words, they were extravagant. "I vow to look at you every day both sides. I vow not to arrange the world on your behalf. I vow to sit in your kitchen on Thursdays and in your garden on every other day, and to speak when I can and be silent when I can't, and to trust that both are enough." He paused, lost the next line, found it. "I vow to hold both portraits, the one in the drawer and the one in front of me, because they're both you, and I love both, and I won't choose." Rosalind's vows were shorter. "I vow to stop angling. I vow to plant things in your garden without asking. I vow to find every error in every ledger you own and tell you about it in exhaustive detail. I vow to sing off-key in your church and argue about apple yields at your table and put my hand on your face whenever I want, which will be often, because your face is my favorite face and I plan to look at it for a very long time." Ptolemy, beneath the pew, sneezed. Martha said, "About time." The Reverend blew his nose into a sermon he'd accidentally grabbed instead of a handkerchief. That spring, Rosalind planted a garden on the east side of Calder Hall, the side facing the village. Not the private garden, not the walled garden. The side everyone could see. She planted roses, climbing roses, the kind her mother grew at Briar Cottage, the kind that need trellises and time and patience and don't bloom the first year. She planted them in soil that was compacted and poor and that everyone said wouldn't support them. She improved the soil, compost, mulch, attention. She built trellises from estate timber. She worked in the open, in daylight, with her face in full view of anyone walking the lane. The roses bloomed in the second year, pink, white, red. Climbing the east wall, visible to the village, planted by a woman they'd called the Scarred One, growing in ground the experts said was too damaged. On the morning the first rose opened, Rosalind stood at the east wall with Edmund beside her. The bloom was small, pink, imperfect. One petal was shorter than the others, giving it a lopsided look, like a smile that pulls differently on each side. "It grew," she said. "You grew it." "The soil grew it. I made the soil possible." Edmund looked at the rose and at the woman beside it, the curls at her neck, the eyes, the scars catching the morning light, the irises on the south wall behind her, the herbs in the kitchen garden, the ledgers balanced, the accounts fixed, the estate running better than it had in a decade because she'd turned her attention to everything he owned and improved all of it without being asked. "Rosalind, Edmund, I would like to, if you say something careful and measured, I will throw this trowel at you. You are extraordinary. That wasn't careful. I'm learning." She smiled. Both sides. The left pulled differently. The scars changed the shape, made it asymmetrical, made it hers. Not the smile from the portrait? A different smile. Better. Because this one had survived something. And that is the story of the woman whose sister took her face, and the man who spent 7 years learning to speak, and the garden that grew on the damaged side of the wall. Thank you for being here tonight. Every listen, every comment, every subscription builds this place. And this place is for the women whose faces were changed and whose hearts were not. If this stayed with you, tell me where it landed. Was it the portrait in the locked drawer? The vaccination that didn't take? The dozens of unspoken sentences? Martha's hands shaking in the forge after everyone thought she was fine? The 6 weeks of silence? The irises on the south wall? The fair she went to alone? Mrs. Hargreaves and the borrowed book and the apology nobody arranged? Philippa on the lane, 4 years late? Or was it the rose on the east wall, growing in damaged ground, lopsided, imperfect, and blooming anyway? Drop it below. I read everyone, and if you haven't subscribed, the next story is already in the soil. It will bloom. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and remember, scars are not the end of the story. They are the place where the new story starts. Good night. I'll see you in the next one.